My name is Caroline Hargrove. I am 34 years old. And on the afternoon of September the 14th, in front of 212 wedding guests inside the Grand Meridian Ballroom in Charleston, South Carolina, my mother leaned across the head table and told the groom's father that I had never held a real job in my life. She said it with the bright, apologetic smile she has always used when she is embarrassed by me, the particular smile she has been deploying since I was about 12 years old, the one that says, I am deeply fond of this person, but I cannot comfortably explain them to you in polite company. She said, Caroline? Oh, she's our other daughter. We have two, you know. Amanda married so well, you've probably met the Whitmores. But Caroline, our other one, she's always been a bit of a dreamer. You know how it is. No real career, no real plan. She floats, she always has. We worry about her constantly. She said it clearly, in her warm Savannah drawl, and she said it into a wireless microphone she had reached across my father's arm to pick up from the edge of the table, a microphone that the sound technician had not yet disabled between speakers. And every one of those words went through the main speakers of the Grand Meridian Ballroom at a volume that was impossible to miss and impossible to retrieve. The room went quiet in that particular way, that a room of 212 people only goes quiet when everyone hears the same thing at the same moment and collectively understands that something has occurred which cannot be taken back. I heard a fork touch a plate somewhere to my left. I heard a chair adjust on the parquet floor. I heard a small, tight intake of breath from the table directly behind me. I picked up my champagne glass, and I took a slow, deliberate sip, and I looked across the beautiful room, across the white floral centerpieces and the layered candlelight, and the 212 people in their finest clothes, and I found the eyes of the man sitting alone at a table near the eastern wall, Thomas Aldridge, our chief operating officer, the man who had flown from Seattle that morning, specifically, for this room and this evening. I watched him press his lips together very carefully. He raised his champagne glass exactly 1 centimeter in my direction, which, for Thomas, constitutes an expression of significant and genuine emotion. I set my glass down. I smoothed the fabric of my dress over my knees. And I waited. I have always been exceptionally good at waiting. Before this story goes any further, I want to stop and ask you something. Where in the world are you right now? At this exact moment? What city, what country, what time of day is it where you are sitting with this? I genuinely want to know. Drop your location and your local time in the comments below. If it is morning where you are, if it is the middle of the night, if you are on a commute, or folding laundry, or sitting in a parked car because you needed 5 quiet minutes away from the noise of your own house, I want to know. And if this story is already reaching something in you, if you connect with stories about women who were dismissed, explained away, and quietly written off by the very people who were supposed to know them best, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. We come back here every single day for exactly this reason. Now let me take you all the way back to where this began, because nothing that happened in that ballroom makes sense without understanding the 20 years that preceded it. Growing up in Savannah, Georgia, the Hargrove family occupied a particular kind of middle-class Southern social position that had always depended more on the performance of respectability than on any underlying substance. My father, Richard Allen Hargrove, was a regional sales director for a pharmaceutical distribution company based in Atlanta. He was the kind of man who owned 3 good suits and wore them on a careful rotation, and who laughed easily and generously at other people's jokes, and who never quite succeeded at the level he implied in casual conversation, but who had a natural, unguarded warmth that made people trust him immediately and completely. In the social circles my mother worked hard to maintain, that warmth and that ease with strangers functioned as sufficient currency for most occasions. My mother, Patricia Hargrove, born a Caldwell, was a woman whose entire identity had been constructed outward, in the direction of what other people thought of her and of us. She organized committees at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church. She served as chairwoman of the annual garden tour for the Savannah Historic District Preservation Society for 11 consecutive years. She knew the names of everyone's children and their school placements and their engagements and their career updates, And she deployed this knowledge like a kind of social architecture, always building, always adjusting, always arranging the external world into the most flattering possible arrangement for herself and for the family name. My mother was not a cruel woman. I want to be very clear about that. She was not malicious. She was a woman who had been taught from girlhood that the most important things were how things looked and how they were received, and she had lived by that teaching with a discipline and a dedication that I have, in my most honest moments, always found genuinely impressive, even when it hurt me. Patricia had 2 daughters to work with. My older sister Amanda, who is 3 years and 4 months my senior, was the one who made my mother's life feel coherent and validated. Amanda had been effortlessly pretty from childhood, in the precise way that is recognized and rewarded immediately in Southern social culture, and she was socially fluent from the time she could form full sentences, the kind of child who made adults feel intelligent and interesting when she spoke to them, who remembered the names of teachers, spouses, and the particulars of neighbors, vacations, and who could read the emotional temperature of any room with the calm, practiced accuracy of someone twice her age. Amanda was also, and I say this with clarity and not cruelty, completely uninterested in anything that did not present itself immediately on the surface. She did not sit with ambiguity. She did not pursue the difficult question when the easier one was available. She moved through the world with a lightness that served her consistently and completely, and my mother loved her for it, in a way that required absolutely no explanation. Amanda was the proof my mother needed that she had done it right, that the values she held and the priorities she had maintained were correct and were producing correct results. When Amanda married at 26, a man named Bradley Whitmore of the old Chatham County Whitmores, whose family name functioned as its own social shorthand in Savannah and the surrounding Low Country, that marriage became, without question, the single greatest achievement of my mother's adult life. The grandchildren that followed, 2 boys and a girl, were merely the continuation of a story my mother considered essentially complete and entirely successful. And then there was me. I was the quiet one. I was the one who sat at the Thanksgiving table with a library book balanced on her knee under the tablecloth, while Amanda held court above it. I was the one who, at age 11, dismantled my father's aging desktop computer in the garage on a rainy October Saturday and put every component back correctly, which impressed absolutely no one in my family and made my mother look at me with the expression she reserves for things she cannot comfortably classify. I was the one who earned a full academic scholarship to Georgia Tech at 17 on the basis of test scores that my high school guidance counselor described, in a phone call I overheard through my bedroom door while pretending to read, as, honestly, a little alarming, in the best possible way. I spent 4 years at Georgia Tech in Atlanta studying computer science and business administration, and I graduated summa cum laude on a warm Saturday morning in May, and both my parents attended, and they sat in the stadium and they applauded at the correct moment, and afterward my mother's very first comment, standing outside in the May sunshine holding a bouquet of grocery store carnations she had purchased at the Kroger on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard on the way to the campus, was that she wished I had chosen a university with a more attractive campus for my photographs. My father said the ceremony had run longer than he had anticipated, and asked if we were doing lunch because he had eaten nothing since a granola bar in the car outside Macon. I want you to understand something clearly, because I think this is important for everything that follows. This was not a childhood that could be defined by cruelty or screaming, or any of the sharp, obvious, legible betrayals that make for a clean and simple narrative. This was something quieter and, in some ways, far harder to articulate because it was the kind of damage that cannot be pointed to in a single moment. It was the accumulation over 20 years of 1,000 small, consistent, completely unremarkable signals that added up to a single unmistakable message. In the hierarchy of this family's attention, of its pride, of its genuine interest and investment, I was placed at a specific and understood level. That level was somewhere below Amanda's social calendar and above the topic of annual home insurance renewals. That was my place in the architecture of this family, and I understood it with complete clarity by the time I was 15 years old. At 15, I made a decision. I have returned to it every single day since. I decided not to need their approval, not as an act of rebellion, not out of any hot or dramatic anger, but out of a kind of cold and very clean logic that I think was always the most natural language of my mind. I could not change what they valued. I could not rewire my mother's fundamental architecture or expand my father's peripheral vision by wanting to. What I could do was build something so real, so solid, so undeniable, that it would stand entirely on its own merits and would require no one's blessing to remain standing. I decided to build it quietly. I decided to speak through results and only through results. I decided in the language I would later use in conference rooms and investor meetings and negotiating sessions to play the longest game I could imagine. The long game, as it turned out, took 11 years from that moment to the evening at the Grand Meridian Ballroom. After Georgia Tech, I went directly west. I had a job offer from a mid-sized software company in San Francisco that built supply chain logistics technology for regional distribution companies, and I accepted it at a starting salary of $67,000 per year, and I did not explain to anyone in my family what the role actually entailed or what the company actually did. Because I had learned by then that information without context that a person is prepared to receive is simply noise. I rented a room in a 2-bedroom apartment in the Sunset District. Sleeping on a pull-out couch, I shared rotating schedules with one of my roommates, and I ate a great deal of frozen food and stayed up very late on weeknights, arguing about product strategy and software architecture, with 2 other women who had come west for similar reasons. And I want to be honest about this, I was happier than I had ever been at any prior point in my life. For the first time, I was in rooms and in conversations where the quality of your thinking was the only credential that mattered. Nobody cared where you went to high school or what your father's title was. The problem in front of you either got solved or it did not. There was a clarity to that binary that I found, genuinely, like breathing. For the first time, after years of being in a room with slightly too little oxygen, I moved up at that company with a consistency that I think surprised people who expected me to move more slowly, but which felt, from inside the experience, like simply doing the work as well as it could be done. Within 18 months, I was leading a small product team of 4 people. Within 3 years, I held the title of Director of Product. Within 4.5 years, I was a Vice President, which came with a seat at the strategic leadership table and genuine authority over the direction of 2 core product lines. I was 27 years old, and I was good at what I did, and I knew it, and the people I respected most in that building knew it too, which is the only form of knowing that has ever mattered to me. At 29, I left to build my own company. I left with 2 people I trusted with a completeness I had never extended to anyone before, and have not since extended to anyone outside of those 2. The first was Priya, who had been my closest colleague at the supply chain firm from our first week there, who held an MBA from the Wharton School and had a talent for reading markets and competitive landscapes that was, in my honest professional assessment, the most accurate I had encountered at any level of the industry. Priya was also the kind of person who tells you directly and without softening when she thinks you are wrong, which is the single most valuable quality in a business partner, and which is far rarer than people pretend. The second was Daniel Cho, who had joined the supply chain firm as a senior engineer 2 years after me, and who had, in that time, rebuilt 2 of the company's core infrastructure systems from the ground up, in ways that eliminated an estimated $4 million per year in operational overhead. Daniel thought about engineering the way that certain painters think about light, which is to say he understood not just how things worked, but how they could be made to work more elegantly. And elegance in software is not an aesthetic preference. It is a functional advantage that compounds over time. The 3 of us had spent 6 months of stolen lunch hours and late Wednesday evenings building the prototype of what would become Veripath before we ever left our jobs. We incorporated on a Tuesday in February in a law office in the financial district, and we moved into a 3-person office in the South of Market neighborhood that had been used as storage for a restaurant supply company and still smelled faintly of cardboard and industrial cleaning solution, and we went to work. The first 6 months were the kind of period that looks romanticized in retrospect and feels, in real time, like an extended experiment in sustained uncertainty. We were in that office by 7 in the morning most days, and we rarely left before 10 at night. We ate lunch at our desks, and we argued constantly, not unkindly but with genuine urgency, about product direction and technical architecture and which clients to pursue first and how to price what we were building in a market that did not yet fully understand why it needed it. I learned things in those 6 months that no investor pitch or business school curriculum could have taught me, about the specific texture of building something from nothing, about how a team of 3 people either calibrates its trust quickly or fractures slowly, about how the distance between a product that almost works and a product that actually works is not technical, it is almost entirely about the willingness to stay in the room with the problem until it gives. We stayed in the room. We did not always get along. We got the product right. Our first real client was a mid-size logistics company in the East Bay with 430 employees and a workflow problem that had been costing them an estimated $260,000 per quarter in lost productivity. We knew this because we had spent 11 hours over 3 meetings mapping their internal processes with a granularity that made their operations director visibly uncomfortable, and then we had presented them with a number and a solution and a timeline, and they had paused for 22 seconds, which I counted, and then their CEO had said, "When can you start?" That was in month 7. We started immediately. We delivered on time. They renewed. They referred us to 2 other companies in their network within 90 days. That was how Veripath grew for the first 2 years. Not through press coverage or conference appearances or the kind of brand awareness that requires a marketing budget we did not have. It grew through referral, which is the only form of growth that is self-sustaining, because it means the product is actually doing what you said it would. Veripath built enterprise workflow automation software. I understand that this description has no romance to it whatsoever, but what it meant in practice was this. We were helping very large organizations, companies with hundreds or thousands of people, eliminate the staggering amount of time and money they lost every week to internal processes that were manual, redundant, fragmented, and broken. Every large organization has these. Every large organization is aware of them and uncomfortable about them, and largely unable to fix them. Because fixing them requires understanding them first. And understanding them requires looking at them honestly. And looking at them honestly is the kind of work that most large organizations find structurally inconvenient. We made that work possible, and then we made it manageable. And then, over several years of refinement and client conversations that sometimes ran for 6 hours in rooms with bad coffee and fluorescent lights that flickered at the wrong frequency, we made it genuinely elegant. We raised our first round of venture capital in the amount of $3 million from a firm in Palo Alto, whose managing partner had attended our early product demo and called me the following morning at 7:43. We raised our second round, $18 million, 14 months later, at a valuation that made the first round look exactly like what it was. By the time I was 32, Veripath had 142 employees across 3 offices, was processing more than $4 billion in workflow transactions annually through our platform, and was on the active consideration list of every major enterprise software acquirer in North America. Through all of this, through every funding round and product launch and difficult week and genuine breakthrough, my communication with my family in Savannah consisted of monthly phone calls that lasted between 12 and 22 minutes and followed a pattern that I could have scripted after the first 6 months. My mother asked about the weather in California. My father asked whether I was seeing anyone serious. Amanda sent occasional text messages with photos of her children and, periodically, screenshots of articles about the challenges facing women in the technology industry sent without any accompanying comment, which I believe was intended to be kind. When I first mentioned to my mother that I had co-founded a company, she said it sounded fun and asked whether it was similar to Etsy. When I raised the first round of venture funding and referenced it briefly in a call, she said that was wonderful, and then asked whether I had found a good church community out there. When the company began to generate the kind of revenue and press coverage that shows up in regional business publications, I stopped mentioning it. When Veripath became genuinely significant by any professional measure I knew how to apply, I said nothing at all. This was not deception. I want to be precise about that. I was not withholding information for strategic advantage, not in those years. I was protecting my own equilibrium. I had learned through careful observation over many years that any information I gave my family about my professional life would be absorbed into the narrative they had already written about me, the narrative of the daughter who floated and dreamed and never quite landed anywhere concrete. Information that contradicted that narrative was not evaluated or challenged or incorporated. It was simply set aside, like a filing error, and the original story continued unchanged. I had grown genuinely tired of feeding accurate data into a system with no mechanism for updating its conclusions. so I stopped. I built the thing I was building, and I let the world outside my family keep the score, and I trusted that the score would eventually be legible even through the particular fog of my mother's expectations. Now I need to tell you about Meridian Loop, and about Griffin Sutton, and about the specific way in which a small world closes its own circles without asking your permission. My cousin Brittany Caldwell was the daughter of my mother's younger sister, Renee Caldwell, who had remained in Savannah her entire life and who had always been warmer and more perceptive than my mother, which I noticed early and held quietly. Brittany was 28, sweet-natured in a way that was entirely genuine and not at all naive, and she was joyful with the ease of a person who has never had to fight the current of her own circumstances. She had been with a man named Griffin Sutton for 2 years when she sent me a save-the-date card in the spring. Griffin was handsome in a precise, put-together way, and he had the confident, practiced warmth of a man who has been well-liked by most people he has encountered and has never had a strong reason to examine why. He had founded a software company in Atlanta called Meridian Loop, which built scheduling and resource management tools specifically designed for mid-market manufacturing operations. It was genuinely good technology. I knew this with more precision than anyone at that wedding understood, because 9 months before Brittany sent that save-the-date card, our corporate development team at Veripath had identified Meridian Loop as a potential acquisition target during our strategic planning cycle. We had initiated preliminary conversations with the company's board in January. By April, we had a signed letter of intent. By May, we were 3 weeks deep into due diligence. By the 1st of July, Meridian Loop was a wholly owned subsidiary of Veripath, and Griffin Sutton had signed a 2-year employment agreement as Vice President of Product Integration, with an earnout provision and a buyout of his equity stake that put him in an extremely comfortable financial position going into his marriage. Griffin had been across the table from me in 3 rounds of formal negotiations. He had sat in rooms with our legal counsel and our finance team and our integration specialists across 6 weeks of due diligence calls. He had shaken my hand at the signing of the letter of intent and again at the closing of the definitive agreement. He knew, with complete precision and no ambiguity whatsoever, who I was and what I had built. He had never, at any point in any of our professional interactions, mentioned that he was engaged to my cousin Brittany. I had never mentioned that Brittany was my cousin. There had been no reason on either side to connect those worlds. Business proceeds on the basis of the business, and we were both professionals conducting one. When I opened Brittany's wedding invitation in late July and found his name printed next to hers on the inner envelope, I sat at my kitchen table in San Francisco on a Thursday morning at 7:45. With my coffee going cold and the July fog doing its usual slow dissolution over the avenues outside, and I felt something I can only describe as the particular satisfaction of a pattern completing itself without your direct involvement. I am not someone who attributes intention to coincidence, but I am someone who recognizes when a set of facts has produced an outcome that would require a very specific and considered response. I sat with the geometry of those facts for approximately 4 minutes. Then I called Thomas Aldridge. In the 2 months between that Thursday morning phone call and the wedding itself, I did not alter my behavior in any meaningful way. I did not tell Priya. I did not tell Daniel. I did not mention to Brittany that I had spent 6 weeks in a negotiating process with the man she was marrying. I continued to do my work. In August, the Halcyon Systems acquisition of Veripath closed after 4 months of intensive due diligence and negotiation, and the transaction was covered in the technology press in San Francisco and Seattle, and in a brief item in the Wall Street Journal's deal section. My parents do not read the Wall Street Journal's deal section. I am confident of this. I sent Brittany and Griffin a wedding gift from their registry, a set of hand-thrown ceramic dinnerware from a studio in Asheville that Brittany had mentioned wanting. And I confirmed my attendance, and I booked my flights, and I arranged for Thomas to have his own room at the hotel 2 blocks from the church. And I went about the ordinary business of the weeks leading to September the 14th, without drama or rehearsal or anticipation in any form I can identify. I was not preparing for a confrontation. I was not engineering an outcome. I was simply attending a family wedding, which I would have done regardless of any of the intersecting professional facts. The intersecting professional facts were simply there, arranged by the geometry of the world, and what would happen with them would be determined by what my family chose to say and do on that particular evening. As it turned out, they chose to say quite a lot. He picked up on the second ring. I told him I thought he should fly to Charleston with me in September for a family wedding. He asked what his assessment of the situation should be. I told him to bring his good suit and be prepared for an interesting evening. He said he would have his assistant book the flight. I want to pause here, right now, at this midpoint in the story, and speak directly to you. If you have stayed with this story this far, you already understand something important about why September the 14th was different from all the evenings that had preceded it. You understand what it is to have a version of yourself that exists in someone else's mind, a version that is years out of date and deeply inaccurate, and to have no mechanism for correcting it, because the people holding that version have decided they already know who you are, and nothing you say or show them seems to disturb that certainty. You know the specific, quiet weight of sitting in a room full of people who are looking at someone other than who you actually are. If that is where you are right now, please leave a comment and tell me. Tell me whether you are still in the silent building phase or whether your moment has already come. Like this video if this story is finding you. Subscribe to this channel because we are here every single day, and you are exactly who we are here for. Now, the 14th of September, the ceremony was held at 4 in the afternoon at St. Philip's Episcopal Church on Church Street in the heart of the historic district, which is one of the oldest and most beautiful churches in the entire American South, and the ceremony itself was genuine and moving in the way that wedding ceremonies only are when the two people standing at the front of the room are actually sincerely in love and are not performing it. Brittany was luminous. She walked down that aisle in a way that I found entirely authentic and uncomplicated by anything occurring in the professional world around her, which is exactly how it should have been. I sat in my pew near the middle of the church, and I watched my cousin commit herself to a man I had done business with, and I felt nothing but warmth and a specific, uncomplicated affection for this person who had always been kind to me in the ways she knew how to be. Whatever was going to happen in the ballroom later that evening was not about Brittany and Griffin. It never had been. The reception moved to the Grand Meridian Ballroom at 6:30. The room was genuinely beautiful, all arched windows and warm chandelier light, and white floral arrangements the scale of small trees. My family had arrived in force. My parents were at the primary family table near the front, my mother in pale gold crepe with her pearls, my father in the charcoal suit he has owned for longer than I can track. Amanda and Bradley were there, Amanda in blush pink that looked perfectly effortless in the way that only significant effort can produce, which I noticed because I have always noticed the labor beneath Amanda's surface. I was placed 2 rows back at a family-adjacent table, which was correct. Thomas was at a table near the eastern wall, slightly removed from the main social geography of the ballroom, which was entirely consistent with his preference and his function. The cocktail hour passed. I spoke with Aunt Renee, who was glowing and tearful in the way of mothers at their children's weddings. I spoke briefly with Griffin near the bar, and we shook hands, and he looked at me with a very specific alertness in his eyes that told me he understood precisely what the geometry of the evening contained and had not yet determined how to navigate it. I said, "Congratulations, Brittany is wonderful." He said, "She really is. I'm glad you're here." He held my gaze for slightly longer than the sentence required. I smiled and moved on. Dinner was served at 7:15. The speeches began at 8. I know the time because I had checked my watch at 5 minutes to 8 and had noted the stillness in the room as the band leader stepped aside for the first speaker. Griffin's father, Harold Sutton, stood first. Harold was a large man with an assured and practiced authority in public speaking, the kind that comes from 30 years of being the most important person in most rooms he has entered. He spoke about his son with obvious, unperformed pride. He spoke about Brittany with the warm conviction of a man who has been completely won over. He mentioned Griffin's professional accomplishments, including the acquisition of Meridian Loop. He referenced Veripath specifically. He mentioned the scale of the transaction and the caliber of the company that had found Meridian Loop worth acquiring. He said all of this as a proud father establishing context, and he said it well. I watched my mother's face as he spoke. I watched the very specific moment when something shifted behind her eyes, when a fact she had not connected to any other facts began to make contact with adjacent information, when the shape of something she had not yet fully seen began to resolve. She looked across the room toward where I was sitting. I looked back at her. I held her gaze calmly until she looked away. Then Aunt Renee. Then Brittany's maid of honor. A woman named Sloane, who had known Brittany since 7th grade, and who gave a speech that was funny and specific and entirely true. The best kind of wedding speech. Then the best man, Griffin's younger brother, who was also funny, and who clearly adored his brother in the uncomplicated way of younger siblings who have always looked up. The microphone moved from speaker to speaker. The sound technician, a young man stationed near the side wall with his equipment, was managing the wireless units. The protocol was to mute the table microphones between speakers. He had followed it correctly all evening, but in the gap between the best man's toast and the moment when the bandleader would take the floor to introduce the first dance, there was a pause. And in that pause, my mother reached across my father's arm to speak to Harold Sutton, and she picked up the wireless unit from the edge of the table near her plate, and she did not understand that it had not yet been muted, and her voice went through the main speakers of the Grand Meridian Ballroom with perfect, terrible clarity. "Caroline? Oh, she's our other one. Amanda married so beautifully you've probably met the Whitmores. But Caroline is our other daughter. She lives out in California, San Francisco. No, nothing in particular. She's never really found her professional footing. She's always been a bit of a dreamer. No real career, no real plan. She floats. I don't know how better to explain it. We worry. We always have. Now Griffin's company, that was something, wasn't it? Some big technology group out west, they acquired them. Very impressive. Caroline could never manage anything like that. She's a sweet girl, she really is. She just, she floats." 212 people. Every word of it. The silence that followed had a specific weight and texture. My father had gone completely still. Amanda's hand had frozen between the table and her glass. The sound technician reached for his equipment with an expression of genuine distress. My mother, still holding the unit, began to register from the quality of the silence around her that something was not right. But the full shape of what had occurred had not yet reached her. I looked across the room at Thomas Aldridge. He was looking back at me. He raised his glass exactly 1 centimeter. I finished my champagne. I set down the glass. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. I stood. I walked the length of the room to the small raised platform near the head table, and the sound technician, who had recovered himself, confirmed with a small, rapid nod that the secondary wireless microphone in my hand was live. I turned to face the room. I spoke with a calm that I did not have to manufacture, because it was the same calm that I have been building for 11 years in offices and boardrooms and negotiating sessions and early mornings alone at a kitchen table in the fog of the Sunset District. It was the calm of a person who knows exactly what she is and does not require anyone's confirmation of it. I said, "Good evening. For those I haven't had the chance to meet tonight, I'm Caroline Hargrove, Brittany's cousin, and as you've just heard, the family dreamer." I let the room take that in. I want to begin by saying that, Brittany and Griffin, you are genuinely 2 of my favorite people to have been across a negotiating table from, and I mean that in the most specific and loving way possible. The room made a sound that was somewhere between held breath and released tension. My company, Veripath, which I co-founded in San Francisco 5 years ago, with 2 colleagues who remain the sharpest people I know, completed the acquisition of Griffin's company, Meridian Loop, this past July. It was a transaction we are all very proud of. Griffin's technology is excellent, his team is exceptional, and the integration has already made Veripath considerably stronger than it was before. I paused. Veripath was itself acquired in August of this year by Halcyon Systems of Seattle in a transaction valued at just over $2 billion. Our Chief Operating Officer, Thomas Aldridge, flew in from Seattle this morning to be here this evening. Thomas raised one hand from his seat. I tell you all of this not to redirect this evening's attention away from where it absolutely and entirely belongs, which is on these 2 people who are wonderful and deserve everything this room is wishing them. I tell you this simply because I believe that when someone you love describes you incorrectly in front of 200 people, it is both reasonable and honest to offer a brief and accurate correction. One final pause. Brittany, Griffin, I love you. Congratulations. This is a beautiful night. I set down the microphone. I walked back to my table. I sat down. I picked up my water glass. Harold Sutton stood. He walked around the head table with deliberate, unhurried steps, and stopped at my table and extended his hand, and said, "Miss Hargrove, I believe we are very much overdue for a proper introduction." I shook it. He held it for a moment and then released it and walked back to his seat, and I believe he was smiling. The room recovered slowly, in the way of a room processing something it will be talking about for a long time. Several guests I did not know came to introduce themselves throughout the rest of the evening. Griffin's Aunt Catherine sat beside me and put her hand briefly on mine and said, "Good for you." Brittany found me near the end of the night and held both my hands and looked at me and said, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I told her because I had stopped telling things to people who had already decided what I was. She looked at me with the beginning of a very long reckoning in her eyes. I told her it was her wedding night and to go find her husband. My mother did not come to me that evening. My father found me at the coat check near the end of the night and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Caroline." Just that. My name, and nothing else. He looked at me with an expression I recognized from very early childhood, from before I became invisible to him, the expression of a man who sees something clearly and does not have the language for it. Then he went to find my mother. She called 11 days later, on a Tuesday at 9:47 in the morning. I was in a meeting that I did not leave. I let it ring to voicemail. Amanda called 3 days before that, on the Saturday after the wedding. I answered, because I was curious in a way I had not expected to be. She called from her car, and I could hear the particular quiet of a person who is parked somewhere away from her house in order to have a conversation that she does not want overheard. She said, "I've been trying to figure out what to say to you for a week." I told her to say whatever she actually thought. There was a pause that lasted a long time. Then she said, "I think I've been watching Mom do this to you our whole lives, and I never said anything, and I don't know what to do with that." I told her that was an honest thing to say. She said she didn't know what she had expected when she saw you stand up at the reception, maybe anger, maybe some kind of confrontation. She said what she actually saw was something she couldn't name immediately. She said, "You just looked like yourself, completely like yourself." And I realized I hadn't seen that before, and I don't know why. I sat with that for a moment. Then I told her I thought we could have a different kind of relationship now if she wanted one. She said she thought she did. I told her I'd call her when I got back from a trip to our Seattle office the following week. I did call. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes. It was the longest conversation I can remember having with my sister since we were children sharing a bedroom. The message was 4 minutes and 23 seconds long. She said she hadn't known the microphone was active. She said she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She said she was proud of me and had always known I would do something remarkable. I played that message once, in my kitchen in the dark that evening, and I stood there holding my phone for a long time after it ended. She is sorry. I believe her. In the way I believe someone is sorry when the consequence has become large enough to require an apology. What I do not yet know is whether she is sorry for the 4 seconds of the live microphone or for the 34 years of looking in a different direction. Those are 2 different apologies, and only one of them is the one I actually need, and I am going to need a great deal more than a phone call to know which one she is capable of giving. Here is what I have been sitting with in the weeks since that evening, in the early mornings before the city wakes up, with my coffee and the fog dissolving slowly outside the window. I have been sitting with the question of what I actually want from my family now. Not what the evening proved. Not what the public record now shows. Not what Harold Sutton's handshake meant, or what Thomas Aldridge's 1-centimeter glass raise communicated, or what the coverage in the San Francisco Business Times said about the Halcyon acquisition. All of those things exist, and they are real, and they matter in the ways that professional facts matter. But they are not the question I am sitting with. The question I am sitting with is whether the people I come from are capable of seeing me now with any more accuracy than they saw me before September the 14th. Because here is the thing I have come to understand, and I want to say it as plainly as I can. Worth does not cure longing. Achievement does not close the specific old wound of not being seen by the people who were supposed to see you first. I have built something that has generated genuine value for hundreds of people and for a company and for a market. I am proud of that in the way I think one ought to be proud of hard work done well. But that pride is mine. It is not a substitute for the specific and unremarkable thing of being known by your own family. And I want to be careful not to pretend, now that the external facts have shifted in my favor, that the internal ache has been resolved. It has not. It is simply sitting alongside something new, which is the clear and unobstructed view of my own life. And that is not a small thing. That is, actually, everything. Not what I deserved. Not what I earned or proved, or what the record now objectively shows. What I want, going forward, from the people I come from. The honest answer is that I want what I have always wanted. I want to be seen accurately. Not celebrated, not retroactively incorporated into a success narrative that was never meant to include me. I want the particular, ordinary thing of being known by the people who are supposed to know you, of having your actual self recognized by the people who have the most reason and the most opportunity to recognize it. That is not a complicated thing to want. It is perhaps the most fundamental thing a person can want from a family. And it has eluded me for 34 years. And whether it is possible now that the information is too public to be set aside or misclassified, I genuinely do not know. I think my mother loves me in the only language she has ever had. Within that language, a daughter without legible, publicly recognizable markers of success is genuinely invisible, and a daughter with them is retroactively incorporated into the story of successful parenting. I understand this without excusing it. I think my father has spent a lifetime choosing the path of least friction, and that the hand on my shoulder in the coat check was the most direct thing he has said to me in perhaps a decade, and that I am going to hold on to it and see what grows from it. What I want to say to you, right now wherever you are in the world, is this. You do not need the ballroom, and the 200 guests, and the live microphone, and the COO who flew in from Seattle. You do not need the moment of public correction. The moment that mattered, the only moment that ever mattered, happened 5 years before that wedding, in a 3-person office in the South of Market neighborhood that smelled like cardboard and industrial cleaning solution, when Priya looked up from her laptop at 11:30 on a Thursday night and said, very quietly, "It's working. Caroline, it's actually working." That was the moment I stopped being the family dreamer and started being everything I had been building toward. The ballroom was just the moment the rest of the world caught up with something that was already true. And I need you to hear this. Your work is real before anyone witnesses it. Your worth does not require an audience to exist. The thing you are building quietly, in the hours that no one is watching, in the early mornings and the late evenings and the stubborn middles of difficult years, that thing is already real. The day the room goes quiet is coming. You do not have to rush it. You only have to keep building and keep waiting and trust the quality of what you are making. Build it in silence. Let it speak when it is ready. And trust, as I have come to trust, that the people in the room who are meant to recognize you will recognize you. And the people who are not ready to see you clearly cannot be forced into clarity by any acquisition or any microphone or any quiet, deliberate moment at a ballroom podium. Clarity comes when it comes. Your job is only to remain, exactly and entirely, yourself. I want to leave you with a question, because the questions I carry with me last longer than any answer, and I want to leave you with something that stays. If you had been sitting at that table in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, if you had been the one in that room, while someone who was supposed to love you most accurately described you as nothing to 200 people, what would you have done? Would you have stood up? Would you have stayed in your seat? Would you have walked out and never come back? There is no correct answer here, and I am not asking so that I can tell you what you should have done. I am asking because I think the answer says something true about where you are and what you need, and I think that is a question worth sitting with. Leave it in the comments. I will read them. This channel is a conversation, not a monologue, and your voice in it matters more than you know.